River North, Curtis Park, the Welton Street Corridor. These three distinct districts make up one of Denver's oldest neighborhoods, Five Points. The history of Five Points is deeply rooted in African American culture, jazz, and discrimination. Though the neighborhood is no longer predominantly Black, it continues to celebrate its roots through landmarks and annual festivals, including Juneteenth and the Five Points Jazz Festival. This neighborhood's powerful narrative continues to shape the culture of Denver today. The city of Denver was founded on November 22, 1858, and shortly thereafter began to experience intense population growth. This growth was paired with the construction of the streetcar line by the Denver Horse Railroad Company that linked Five Points with downtown Denver. Homes began to spring up in the neighborhood, and Curtis Park was labeled as the first streetcar suburb. At its start, Five Points was home to racial and socioeconomic diversity. However, with the development of Capitol Hill, wealthy members of the Five Points community began to move out. By the early 1900s, the diversity of Five Points began to transform from a choice to a constraint. Beginning in the 1930s, confinement was reinforced through the discriminatory practice known as redlining, in which red areas on residential security maps denoted an inability to obtain government loans. Five Points was a red area. A current Denver Public Library exhibit called Undesign the Red Line exposes the history of redlining and its lingering effects. At a time when 90% of Denver's Black residents lived in the Five Points area, federal and local government policies conspired to prevent the people living in this neighborhood from building the kind of wealth that the GI Bill and other efforts made available to white families. Despite blatant inequities and constraints, residents of Five Points built up and created a community.
So 5 Points for that period between like the 20s and the 50s was coined as the Harlem of the West, and rightfully so. Like art and music and food and entrepreneurship were like bustling in this neighborhood.
In the face of segregation, Five Points was further cemented as a cultural hub. The jazz scene flourished during the early to mid-19th century with establishments like Hooper's Ex-Servicemen's Club, known as the hottest jazz spot in the West. People traveled to Denver from across the United States to see popular jazz bands and performers such as Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Dinah Washington. The Rossonian, formerly known as the Baxter Hotel, was a core institution in the neighborhood. The Rossonian hosted famous musicians who were denied accommodations in downtown hotels due to segregation.
Artists of color still were confined to the Five Points neighborhood. It didn't matter who you were, it didn't matter how big you were, it didn't matter if you were Ella Fitzgerald. Still had to stay at the Rossonian.
In 1968, the establishment of the Fair Housing Act made the practice of redlining illegal. No longer constrained by this form of institutionalized racism, residents with the financial capability moved out of Five Points.
People of color started to say, oh wow, I can move out to Aurora now. I can move to the Westminsters. I can move to Cap Hill. I can move outside of this core community where we have been forced to live. They took a lot of that power and resources with them. So you started to see a decline of 5 Points.
The out-migration of higher-income Blacks, coupled with a 37% decrease in housing units, has contributed to the deterioration of the neighborhood.
Once you take away a lot of the economic power from sending families away, that community starts to diminish.
Despite attempts at revitalization, the neighborhood continued to decline. In 1994, Denver's Regional Transit District opened the Central Corridor Light Rail line. The implementation of this new form of transportation foretold the development to come. As the light rail was being constructed on Welton, the Rhino District was still home to several vacant warehouses and a failing infrastructure. Artists began to take advantage of the affordability of Rhino, and by 2004, they had become the voices of revitalization. However, long-term residents to 5 Points began to experience negative impacts of redevelopment.
People have definitely been pushed out. Businesses have been pushed out. People I personally know have been pushed out.
The fear of gentrification and involuntary displacement are concerns for the future of the neighborhood. With redevelopment comes a struggle to reconcile historic preservation and economic development. In 2015, 10 blocks of the Welton Street Commercial Corridor were designated as 5 Points Historic Cultural District, signifying a concerted effort to recognize 5 Points' historic significance. The sprawling murals of Rhino also offer a nod to the past.
I think the biggest challenge of the neighborhood today is maintaining the cultural fabric in which made this neighborhood popular in the first place.
The demographics of 5 Points are changing, but its role as a cultural hub remains. The building character of 5 Points can be preserved through zoning, but such measures will not stop home values from rising. We do not know what the future of 5 Points holds. However, we believe that the future will be determined through the answering of two crucial questions. Does the preservation of a cultural hub take precedence over impeding further displacement? Are the two mutually exclusive?